Welcome to episode number 75, Pain. I'm your host, Damon Soka. Now this episode is a little longer than normal, and you probably noticed that, but I didn't want to split this subject into two parts. Now, I hope you'll forgive me for the length today. And as always, if you enjoy it, send it on to someone that you know. Now on to today's episode. I've been pondering this topic for some time, and this particular week seemed to me to be the most appropriate time to address it. I read an article in the news about a man who had passed a kidney stone and who also had lost his young daughter in relatively close succession to one another. He was discussing the pain of both incidents, and he noted that both were painful, meaning that the way the body reacted to both events was actually similar in many senses. He also noted that the pain of losing his daughter did not even come close to the kidney stone. Today's episode is about pain and how we interact with it in our lives and how it changes and molds our very core being and nature. Now, you might think with all of our scientific knowledge, measuring devices, medical researchers, and experts, we would have a fairly good idea of how best to describe pain, its level of intensity, its frequency, its length, and so forth. Somehow we should be able to hook up a few monitors to the sides of your head, your palms, and your feet, and know exactly where your pain is and its intensity. The truth of the matter is that while mankind has been feeling pain for its known existence on the earth, science really does not know exactly how to define it. Certainly science can point to some causes: childbirth, passing a kidney stone, breaking a bone, and burning your skin to the third degree, all classify as types of severe pain. The cause is an identifiable damage to cellular systems, where a signal is rushed to the brain, telling of impending doom if something's not done to stop further damage. Now, the pathway of the signal is, of course, this complex system of nerves running throughout all our body. Now, the nervous system is as complex and somewhat unknown as the brain for the most part, in the sense of how it fully interacts and operates with the brain. Science does know a great deal about the nervous system and how it works and transmits its messages, but beyond that, we get into the murky gray matter of the brain. Science does know that some types of medications can impede the signal to the brain and dampen it to the point that the pain signal reaches the brain in an altered state, where the interpretation is that things are going much better than they really are, when in reality nothing has changed but the altered signal. We know of many types of painkillers, as they are called. Normally when science talks about pain, they mean this physical pain. Damaged parts of the body run up the emergency signal to the brain. Now, you might think that the brain has this one little pain center with large buttons to the adrenal system and other parts of the body so you can react before more damage occurs. This is that flight or fight system we use to get us out of what we perceive to be dangerous. You might even think that that little pain center has the master controls for the entire body, because once you feel serious pain, everything else seems to melt away as far as thought and action. The truth of the matter is that it is a little bit more complex, as the brain actually has several parts that deal with and interpret the pain signals. Now, what is important for today is that regarding physical pain, we have a complex system of nerves, signals, and parts of the brain that do the interpreting. Now, science is not entirely sure as to how this interpretation is done in the brain and how it decides intensity and what should be done to stop the pain. Science also has some trouble with understanding why sometimes the brain does not register pain when it should, and why the pain system sometimes just goes up crazy. The reality is that science only really understands some of the basic nerve chemistry and some of the methods by which the signal is transported, and certainly they have some good theories to cover physical pain. Now, physical pain normally has a very specific problem and some type of damage to the body systems, meaning I can point to a broken leg, a swollen appendix, a goose egg on my head, a burn on my finger. The pain is directly related to a physical problem: inflammation or damage to cells. However, there exists a second type of pain that goes by several names: psychological pain, emotional pain, mental pain, and a variety of others. Now, this type of pain does have causes, but those causes are not due to physical damage of the body's systems. This is the pain felt by the man who had lost his daughter, not by the one who had passed the kidney stone. Nothing physically had been damaged. Nearly every human being experiences this type of pain in varying degrees, and surprisingly, or perhaps not so surprisingly, this type of pain has been categorized as more difficult, longer lasting, as posing greater risk to health and death, more intense and fatiguing, and more often individuals who experience this pain long-term would actually prefer to experience the physical pain. The origin of the emotional mental pain, in that it is not physical, can be difficult to determine at times. It is brought about by a host of environmental conditions. Now, the list of these conditions is extensive, including things like death of a loved one, loneliness, heartbreak, isolation, sin, feeling unloved or unwanted, loss of relationship, loss of meaningful life, depression, anxiety, and the list of negative circumstances is far more lengthy. Almost anything in the mortal condition that causes the emotional and mental systems of the body serious stress can cause this pain in all levels of intensity. This pain varies per person as to what causes it and the intensity. Now, I may not feel the same pain at the loss of my dog as would someone else who has lost theirs. And the reason can be many, including how each of us were raised, cultural assumptions about animals, development of compassion, which is really the ability to assimilate others' pain, my own personal experiences with the dog and with death and pain, and genetic factors that determine my ability to feel the pain. Now, while emotional or mental pain is something that can bind together our experiences on this earth, because we all experience it, each individual experiences emotional pain within a pretty large spectrum of varying degrees. Now, if you read just a small smattering of information from the web, from reliable sources, you will quickly find that science really struggles with emotional or mental pain and how to classify it. You will also find that they struggle immensely with how to best treat it. Science somewhat understands how to treat and heal a broken leg or a swollen appendix, but it's often baffled by what we would call a broken heart or depressed emotional state. Some scientists even want to classify this type of pain as not pain at all, but something entirely different. They really do not want to recognize it the same way that they do physical pain. They want pain to match up with something physical, something they can see and treat. I think it's a natural response to their physical world of measurements and instruments. If they can't see it in some form, then they have serious trouble recognizing it. However, there are some things about emotional pain that present problems for the science community. The first is the brain. When you look at brain activity when somebody is suffering physical pain and when somebody is suffering emotional pain or anguish, the brain seems to process both types of pain in the same locations and in similar ways, meaning that the brain is recognizing on some level that emotional pain is equivalent to physical pain. Meaning, again, that while we separate our pain into different categories, our brain can feel it very similarly. Because of this similarity between the pains of emotional pain and physical pain, this actually can create some pretty similar symptoms. Physical pain often causes responses in other systems of the body. Headaches, stomach and digestive issues, pains in other locations actually not affected by the physical pain occur when your body experiences a physical pain. And actually the same is true of emotional pain. Both types of pain can cause systems of the body to react in similar ways. However, emotional pain is different in some ways in that it is not always isolated to one part of the body. Often emotional pain can be felt everywhere, and sometimes in just a few locations. People of similar backgrounds and cultures often will feel emotional pain similarly, but that is not always true either. What we find is that pain is a learned event and also a genetic one, making it very complex in its nature. So why is all this pain talk important to us? First is to understand that science does not really have a complete grasp of pain physically, and even less so emotionally or mentally. Sure, they can see that all the same outward signs and physical responses, but they have very little understanding of how intensity of pain is transmitted and the brain's interpretation of that pain. They even have less understanding of how emotional and mental pain trigger the same systems in the brain. Yet the emotional pain has no signals from the nervous system of the body. They're even entirely baffled at the idea that emotional pain can be far more punishing and difficult than physical pain. Now, if you really look at it from a purely rational point of view, to think that another human being removed from your life would cause such intense pain and suffering that it might cause death itself just doesn't make sense, but only from a rational physical point of view. Basically, you are saying that one life event, death of someone else, rationally interpreted by the brain, can have such an effect on your body as to cause sufficient pain and suffering to cause disability or death, when nothing has been done to the physical body or even the chemistry of it. The only issue is that the brain has interpreted the death of another person as terribly painful experience and alters various systems in the body to cause death or disability. Now, science doesn't really understand this in the slightest form, only to say that one, yes, can die of a broken heart because nothing else simply would have caused this reaction. Of course, we understand something that science simply cannot admit. There is more to life than the physical, and we would go so far as to say that the physical is only a small part of our life. If you look at it through the emotional, mental, and spiritual landscape, our life is really about mental, emotional, and spiritual experiences we interpret through our physical body and our spiritual senses, and that interaction with other beings on an emotional and mental plane. Now, we might also call that our spiritual life, and perhaps we should. We are beings that feel. We are motivated by our feelings, uplifted by them, moved by them, depressed by them, and grow anxious by them. We see our whole world through our emotional, mental, and spiritual state. We filter everything we see, feel with touch, taste, and hear through our emotions. Think simply of the smell of a flower. Why is that pleasant? Because it brings about an emotional response. Think about a beautiful sunset. Why is it beautiful versus any other sunset? Because of our emotional response to it. So if we had to extend that idea to pain, more emotional than these electrical signals in the brain, it represents what my body considers to be a negative experience. Pain is emotional and can and does alter our entire state of mind, body, and soul. It can be overwhelmingly emotional and lead to all types of adverse outcomes. The idea or the purpose of pain in the body, if one really thinks about it, is to direct our lives away from detrimental experiences to both our physical and our spiritual bodies, meaning that pain serves the purpose of guiding us to more positive planes of existence in life. If you look at it from the spiritual, one main purpose for pain is to direct us away from destructive practices and experiences. Sin and pain generally go together, and so do happiness and joy, which could be described as the absence of pain, although that's probably not the best definition, because joy can still coexist with pain. Pain really is the sensation in our spiritual and physical brains that says to us personally, let's not do that again. Let's put some precautions into place so that doesn't happen again. Physical pain is normally about cell damage or other types of body harm. Now, emotional pain is something far different. There is a question to be answered as to how our bodies know what should cause emotional pain and what should not. We can say, as science does, that it is a combination of genetic and learned experiences, but we know in the gospel that it is far more than that. Pain and happiness, for that matter, is a remembrance of a previous experience in the premortal world. Why do we know something is wrong or will cause spiritual and emotional distress? Because we learned that it does before this earth life. We're not some genetic pre-programmed microbe from the ocean. We are spiritual beings having a mortal experience, and so we bring with us a host of spiritual and emotional experiences from the previous world. The pain we feel, emotionally and spiritually, are those learned experiences from eons of training and learning. So we know sin because we have painful experiences reminding us of what we already know. Now, before I go too far down this road, there's something very important about emotional pain that I have yet to discuss, and that will be very important to this discussion. That is the fact that brain chemistry is also intertwined with our emotional pain. Although scientists don't know a great deal about it, they do know that certain brain chemistry, if altered, can create depressed and emotional painful states of the mind and body. So somewhere in the link between the spirit and the body is a complex mixture of chemistry, both spiritual and physical, that can cause emotional states to be altered. Meaning, if something alters the brain chemistry, genetic, or environmentally, that altered chemistry can produce the effects of emotional pain and suffering, both spiritually and physically, without any cause. Meaning that while the pain always accompanies sin, in this case, sin does not always accompany pain. In fact, we can have serious emotional and mental pain without any significant causes for that pain. Now, this comes normally through that altered chemistry. Now, don't get me wrong, we can feel serious pain when someone injures us emotionally, meaning we really can have a good cause. While emotionally we remain scarred, physically we are intact. What is important to remember always is that physical chemistry can alter emotional and spiritual states and produce pain without a cause other than that altered chemistry. We call this a form of mental illness. We can also have emotional pain with a cause, but what has triggered the pain is what we would call an injustice. For some reason, and I will get to that reason, we as human beings have a serious attachment to the idea of justice. In a mortal world where justice doesn't occur very often and really is not the standard. Now, some might classify justice as a survival instinct, but survival in my book and in nature does not seem to care much about justice and what's fair and right. Survival is really the essence of placing my life in value over everything else, and that even means justice and fairness. Yet we as humans have this intense desire to see fairness and justice, and we are pained, often seriously pained, mentally and emotionally, when an injustice has occurred to us, or even to someone we consider part of us. Not only do we desire justice and fairness for ourselves, but we can feel the same pains and emotional distress when someone whom we have taken into our circle of trust and love experiences an injustice. We would call this form of love and compassion. We would call this a form of love and compassion, and of course, that is what it is, but we also experience another side of this injustice, and that is punishment, or exacting the same pain and suffering we feel upon the perpetrator of the injustice. We want them to feel as we do and to suffer as we do emotionally and mentally. Now, often we pursue this in the court systems in physical forms such as jail and prison and time, but often that just doesn't seem to cover the wound and bind it up. So we want to extract physical pain upon them to make up for our emotional pain and suffering. And now I'm not really going to go much further with that idea. I think you get it and felt it in some small or perhaps large way. We have all felt injustice and the intense desire to seek retribution and to inflict pain upon another so that fairly they will feel what we do. We desire fairness even in emotional and a physical pain. Injustice causes us serious pain. What I desire to extract from this idea of justice is that it causes us this pain, and sometimes a very, very serious pain. For instance, when in my original story about the man who lost his daughter, his loss felt as an extreme injustice, but he also had no real enemy to blame, which for the most part increases the intensity of his pain as he has nowhere to extract or place justice. When we have serious emotional pain, no place to exact some type of justice, that type of pain can be some of the most intense and crippling. When you combine long periods of time with that type of unjustified pain, the suffering can be immense. And so we have arrived at mental illness. Suffering emotional pain without justice of any form, and for no logical reasons such as transgression. Even when our mental illness comes from abuse and other such traumatic experiences, that pain is felt intensely because of the seriousness of the injustice placed upon the soul. The greater the injustice, the greater the pain. In discussing the idea of injustice and the perpetrator, one might think that they are getting off easy, meaning that they don't seem to be suffering as we do, even though they induce the pain and suffering. It is interesting to note that committing an injustice, or sin as it might be called, does come with emotional and mental anguish. So much so that the perpetrator must either submit to the punishment, meaning the pain, ask forgiveness, and do what they can to make up for the injustice, or they must turn off the injustice side of their pain. Now you might ask, how does someone turn off the pain of injustice that they have committed? The only way that this can be done is to turn away from what causes us to see and to suffer for the injustice, and that is the light within us. The light of Christ we carried into this world that teaches us of truth and causes suffering when we sin. Really, this is just a remembrance of our previous life and learning. From what I see and can understand of it, one must entirely block out those emotions, living as it were in darkness without that light. The darkness itself does contain pain and anguish, but the darkness is in some ways less painful than living in the light of Christ, having committed the injustice. Now, this is the only way that Lucifer can continue to commit sin and inspire sin. He must turn off all sources of light, basically, in a sense, condemning himself to outer darkness, as this is the only place where he can exist and not suffer immensely for what he has done and continues to do. So yes, those who commit sin suffer great anguish and in the darkness. Given that idea, let's return to, again, mental illness and pain. The pain of mental illness creates a serious problem for our soul, our mind, and our body. The continuous level of emotional pain causes serious physical reactions to occur, mental and emotional concerns, and then also several spiritual problems. Let's start with the physical problems. As I discussed earlier, the pain of depression and anxiety can cause the physical body to react. Often these physical symptoms make finding the root cause of the issue more difficult. When you go to the doctor with a stomach pain, headaches, backaches, muscle pains, digestive issues, rashes, and the like, the tendency in our current medical system is to look for a physical root cause. And I can tell you that they will make an extensive search before they begin to look at other options, what they feel are less likely issues, such as depression, anxiety, and similar mental illness conditions. Often, these are some of the last illnesses that will be explored, and normally this occurs after a variety of testing and medications for a host of other physical issues. I believe because the brain registers the pain in similar areas, it uses the symptoms it has at its disposal to obtain relief. Now, our bodies know how to get our attention in the most effective manner, even if the warning symptoms the body produces might not indicate that the problem is more emotional, mental, and chemistry related other than body. What is very important to note is that mental illness can appear with physical symptoms in such a vague way that it can seriously alter your life and your body without you realizing that the cause is mental illness. I have known people who have suffered for many years undiagnosed simply because the symptoms of pain were more physical than emotional or mental. Now let's talk of the more important part of this emotional mental illness pain, the spiritual, mental, and emotional side of things. When your mind experiences pain, it expects there to be a cause for that pain. If mental illness is caused by trauma or abuse, basically mental and emotional distress is what that is, then often one can point to the cause. But because the cause is an injustice and the brain cannot rectify the injustice, the pain may continue up until through therapy, forgiveness, and the atonement. The injustice then is healed in the soul. I know that it seems strange that injustice needs to be healed, but injustice is as much an injury to the soul as a broken leg is to the body. If you do not work with the right doctors, meaning therapists, spiritual doctors, which is our leaders, and the Lord, both mentally and spiritually, then the pain is likely to continue and may even grow worse with time. It can be entirely impossible to heal this type of wound, what we're talking about, the injustice wound, on your own. And needing help is not a matter of weakness, inability to heal oneself or access the atonement, or a depiction of spiritual weakness or lack of faith. Serious injustice can be like getting into a crippling car wreck. Healing internal organs, bones, and body systems simply takes time, good doctors, medication, physical therapy, and a significant amount of support from friends and family. Healing a serious injustice is identical in that you will need time to heal, a good emotional physician, therapist, and of course the Lord, the atonement, which would be pretty similar to medication, and again the support of friends and family. In both cases, you are likely to be left with scars. Now, scars will fade with time, but you will likely never be able to forget the injustice in some senses. But what you will be able to do is remove the pain and suffering from the injustice. Now, if your emotional and mental pain does not have a cause, there's no injustice, other than maybe some altered brain chemistry, beyond the emotional suffering, your brain will have serious difficulties because it has been trained to look for the cause and effect. If the effect is pain, then your brain says a cause must exist. The brain's very unlikely to register that the chemistry has simply been altered and that you're dealing with a false signal. That signal to the brain is its reality, and thus your reality. So when the pain begins, so does the search for meaning or the cause. I've found that the brain does not deal with the void answer, meaning it does not accept the idea of no cause. This is where several events will often begin to take place for individuals that suffer long-term this kind of pain. The brain desires a cause, and if it cannot find one, then many times it will drive the body to things that will cause pain and suffering so that it might have a cause. You can imagine what you might do if you were looking for pain so that the brain has a cause. Now, you might first try to alter the signal with drugs and alcohol or other substances. The problem here is that most of these substances are in violation of the word of wisdom and church standards. So while the substances alter the pain for moments, another source of pain will appear, which is the pain of sin. Now, this creates such a vicious cycle of destruction, and I think that most of us have seen it in some form or another with those who deal with mental illness. Now, if substances are avoided or we get into the point of being able to overcome the substances or even used irregularly, then individuals will often even resort to other sources for pain. People will resort to abusive relationships, things such as cutting, suicide, risky behaviors, and so forth. All of these, not entirely, but all of these will often carry some kind of pain of sin as well. And I think that I have dealt on this subject sufficiently to understand why someone might resort to these things. Pain is an incredibly powerful source of motivation and will overcome almost any type of spiritual or even survival instinct if given the opportunity. So now we come to the idea of mental illness and pain as a source of purification. Now, based on what I just stated, it doesn't seem as though this type of pain, this emotional suffering, would lead to any type of purification of the soul. While pain and suffering can lead to destruction, it is interesting what this type of pain can do to aid in the spiritual development of the individual. Now, whether the pain is from an injustice or brain chemistry, it can be a moment of refining of the soul if the pain and its consequences can be redirected to the atonement and the Lord. The celestializing occurs as the individual places everything upon the altar for the Lord, and I do mean everything, meaning the individual has to be fully willing to submit completely to the Lord and his purposes. And that includes forgiveness of terrible wrongs, and even allowing the Lord to maintain a mental illness in the body with the pains, but provide strengthening and healing based on our asking in his eternal designs. Now, I personally don't think that I have fully come to do this, place everything on the altar for the Lord and allow for his will to supersede mine, I have come in partially to know the Lord in ways that I simply cannot explain and must be experienced to understand through this mental anguish and pain. This is not an easy process, and it will take time. Well, one might think you can just place everything on the altar all at once, perhaps maybe like Alma the Younger did. I have found it to be more a step process or done in steps. But today, what I want most of all for those of you listening to hear is that this type of celestial pain is a far greater gift than you might imagine. It will lead you to fully and completely understanding the Lord and who he is and what he does. Now keep up the faith, and I know that the Lord will bless you. Do your part, and the Lord will do his, and we'll talk to you next week.